to do with this. You'll get the rest of the song later. All right, so lymphatic system, we're going to talk about what does it do. The first part's an introduction. What is it? What is it? What does it do? Talk about all of this, and then I'll probably end it right there, take a little break, and then we're going to color our sheet for lymphatic system. So we'll talk through the lymphoid organs, their functions, and things that are unique about them. Yeah, we're going to color. It's a weird system. It's not one that people talk about a lot, and I think it's because the parts aren't really connected necessarily. Okay, it is, and they always show it in green just because red and blue are taken and yellow is for nerve tissue. It is not really green. I'm just saying, but it's always in green. I just don't really think lymph is green. And so it's a system of vessels. There are cells of our immune system are also part of it. And then we also have some discrete organs like the appendix and the spleen and the thymus. And they function sort of independently or semi-independently. So I think that's kind of one of those, like, no one really thinks about the lymphatic system, okay? Its job, it is going to return that excess fluid to the bloodstream. And when it does that, it cleans it. And so it's going to filter it before it gets returned to the bloodstream. And our immune system cells reside there. So if there's anything in that blood that could harm us, right, or anything out in the tissues, that is where we are going to surveil it and sort of detect it and then mount an immune response.
Lymphatic vessels recycle excess tissue fluid that accumulates in the interstitium as a result of normal capillary leakage. The walls of the lymphatic vessels act as one-way valves, only letting fluid enter. Once in the vessels, the lymph is advanced toward the systemic circulation. Along the way, the lymph is filtered through several lymph nodes where it is inspected for foreign substances. Upon reaching the thoracic duct, the lymph re-enters circulation.
Okay, so we just did our review. So we go arteries, arterioles, and then blood flows through the capillaries, which are the functional unit in the exchange vessels. We've got a stronger flow out due to hydrostatic pressure on that arterial end, and then on the venous end, we've got that osmotic pressure, which is the greater force pulling things in. However, it's not even. So approximately 15% or 3 liters a day gets left out in the tissue fluid, in the interstitial fluid. And if you think about it, if our blood kept circulating, then all the fluid would be out in the tissues, and we couldn't live that way. So it's sort of like the sewer system. It's going to pick up that excess fluid and then return it to the bloodstream. While it's doing that, that lymph is going to be screened for foreign substances, cellular debris, and our immune cells are there to protect us against disease. So it's involved in fluid balance, it's involved in immunity and protection from disease, and then the third weird, random sort of feeling function of lymphatic system in the small intestines are through lacteals, which are special lymphatic capillaries. So this little green finger right here, and then you can see the lacteals in the middle of the villi, which are finger-like projections of the small intestine. So in our small intestine, we absorb all our nutrients and fats from our diet, like triglycerides and fatty acids, glycerol, fat-soluble vitamins, cholesterol. They are hydrophobic, so they can't go in the bloodstream right away, right? Because we know oil doesn't mix with water. And so it has to be processed through the lymphatic system first. All right, so the parts of the lymphatic system are the lymphatic vessels. And like I said, it's a one-way network that is going to return blood or return fluid to the bloodstream. The fluid inside the vessels is called lymph, and it's a lot like plasma. It's like I said, you can kind of think of your lymphatic system like a sewer system. It just picks up that excess fluid and then returns it to the bloodstream. Other parts of the lymphatic system, we have lymphoid organs and tissues. The primary lymphoid organs are going to be the thymus and the red bone marrow. That is where our lymphocytes and our other immune cells are made or mature. And then we also have the spleen. We're going to talk about lymph nodes. We're going to talk about tonsils, Peyer's patches, appendix. And so they are going to have an immune function. It's called lymphatic system because that is where the lymphocytes live. And these white blood cells, they circulate between lymphatic system, interstitial fluid, and the bloodstream. And so because they move around, they can basically go all over the body and they protect us against disease. And when they are in the lymphoid organs, that's usually where they're defending us, and that is where we're going to mount an immune response. All right, so lymphocytes. We talked about hematopoiesis. It happens in the red bone marrow. We said there's a myeloid line and a lymphoid line. On this lymphoid line, we get T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. These are part of our adaptive specific immune system, which we'll discuss next week. Natural killer cells, we will also discuss next week, but they are also from this lymphoid line. The T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes, you can think about them as a very specialized assassin. Okay, they are going to respond and recognize a specific piece of a pathogen. We just had a pandemic, so we all learned about the spike protein, right? So you have cells by now that recognize just that spike protein. Like, that's how specific they are. And so think about them, they're all carrying around a wanted poster, but you have an army of them. So they're like all carrying different wanted posters. And when we are infected with something that matches, okay, so assassin knows, oh, our target, we've been infected by the target, we're going to create a clone army. Where we do that is in lymphatic organs. To get them activated, they have to meet their assassination target, and they do that in the lymphoid organs. So kind of like, you can think of them like a coffee shop where they just hang out and wait for that one true antigen. Like, just the one. This is the one I was born for. I was destined. And so they wait. And when they find it, then they are going to mount immune response against that antigen. So the antigen is the picture on the wanted poster. Okay, so we saw a picture very similar to this when we were studying the cardiovascular system. So it is a one-way system. Okay, it is going to be alongside the cardiovascular system. Once the fluid enters, it's called lymph. And the other big thing to keep in mind is there is no pump. Okay, there is no pump for this lymph return. Okay, you can see, look, just green vessels and lymph nodes. There's no pump to it. Okay, so that's a very other key difference between lymphatic system and the cardiovascular system. So it begins in the tissues, and so we just kind of drew this out. So here's the arterial side, here's the capillary bed, here's the venule side. And any fluid that's out here is called tissue fluid or interstitial fluid. So it's this fluid outside of cells. The lymphatic capillaries are made, they're still one cell thick, so similar to a cardiovascular capillary, except these cells are going to overlay each other sort of like roof tiles, okay? And then when the pressure increases out here in the interstitium, the pressure is going to cause these little flaps to open, and anything that's out here is going to flow into that capillary. Once the pressure equilibrates, then that little flap closes, and then there's valves inside that are going to prevent that fluid from leaking back out. Okay, so it's a one-way door. So lymph gets in, but it doesn't get out. There are places in the body, usually these are avascular places or hard places, where there are no lymphatic vessels. Okay, there are no lymphatic vessels in the bone marrow, teeth. The cornea of the eye is avascular. There's no lymphatic vessels there. They used to say there was no lymphatic vessels in the central nervous system. Big news in anatomy. There's not a lot of new news in anatomy. We've been around a long time. 2018, they discovered some small lymphatic vessels in the meninges. It was hot news. Did that not come across your feed? No? Okay. There's just some places that there aren't lymphatic vessels. You're not nearly as excited as the anatomists were. All right. So we're picking up in the tissues. That fluid that flows in is called lymph. and then we go lymphatic capillaries, and then those capillaries are going to merge, and we just call them lymphatic vessels. So they're not really veins, we just call them lymphatic vessels. But they're very similar in structure to veins. They do have thinner walls. They have to have more valves because there's no pressure. They have the same 3 layers. So the tunica intima is the endothelium that's going to be in contact with the lymph. They do have a smooth muscle layer, so tunica media, so the vessels can constrict to help move lymph back to the subclavian veins. And then they do have a outer binding layer, the tunica externa. So they're very similar to veins. They're collapsible. The lymphatic vessels are going to merge and form lymphatic trunks. Along the way, the lymphatic vessels are going to be lymph nodes, and you've got like 600 lymph nodes scattered throughout the body. Those lymphatic vessels, like I said, they're going to merge in areas and form a larger vessel. So remember how we had small veins, large veins? We have lymphatic vessels, and then we have lymphatic trunks. And they get names based on their location. So the jugular trunk is the merging of lymphatic vessels from the head and neck. Okay. The subclavian trunk, where's my picture? There it is, there's the label, is going to be merging of all the lymphatic vessels from the upper appendage. Okay. The bronchomediastinal trunk, so broncho refers to lungs, the mediastinum is where the heart is located, is going to collect all of the merging from all of the lymphatic vessels in the thoracic cavity. And then we've got the lumbar trunk, which is going to collect all of the lymph from the lower extremity. And then we have the intestinal tract, so we have the thoracic duct. So these trunks are going to merge into our 2 lymphatic ducts. And of course, it can't be symmetrical. That'd just be too easy. Okay, so on the right side, see how this picture is shaded? This right lymphatic duct it's very short. It's right here. This is the subclavian vein, so underneath the clavicle. This vessel is the internal jugular vein, which we'll talk about in lab. And so it is going to merge and empty, so it's collecting all of the lymph from the right side of the head and the neck, the thorax, and then also that upper right appendage. The other duct is much longer and larger. So this little expanded portion right here, I don't know if you can see it, it's called the cisterna chyli. So a cistern is like a well, and so there's a place where it enlarges. And this is when you're going to get the merging of the trunks, and you have all the intestinal drainage, lymphatic drainage, is going to come into the cisterna chyli. We said that fats from our diet have to go through the lymphatic system. Fat looks milky, right, or white if you look at meat. And so you have a mixing of lymph plus our dietary fats. And so I'm kind of showing you pleural effusion. This is from a chylothorax. So if you follow this cisterna chyli all the way through, so it's going to go through the thoracic cavity, so past the lungs, and then it's going to enter into that left subclavian vein. People can have, they can have trauma, right? And so you can cut arteries, you can cut veins. You can also have damage to lymphatic vessels. Okay, so when there's damaged lymphatic vessels, the lymph leaks out. Just like if you damage an artery, blood's going to leak out. And so lymph can leak out. And in the thoracic cavity, where it can go is in between the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura. Okay, so this is from somebody's lungs. I just kind of wanted to show you what it looks like, just to remind you that there's going to be some fat in that lymph in this area. So you have the cisterna chyli. Chyle means milky, and like I said, this is where our dietary fats are going to enter that lymphatic system, and then that lymph is going to drain into that left subclavian vein. Okay, so the thoracic duct, that's what this one over here on the left is called. It's called a thoracic duct, and it runs from the cisterna chyli all the way through the thoracic cavity to that left subclavian vein. So it's much, much larger. It's roughly 18 inches. If someone's a taller person, it's going to be longer. If someone's a shorter person, it's going to be shorter. Okay, so it goes from the abdominal cavity up to the left subclavian vein. So recapping lymphatic flow, it starts here with lymphatic capillaries, and then the lymphatic vessels, and then there's lymph nodes on the way. And the vessels going into a lymph node are called afferent, I think A for arrival vessels, and then lymph gets filtered in the lymph nodes, And then when it exits a lymph node, the vessels leaving are called efferent or exiting lymphatic vessels. Then the vessels merge and we have lymphatic trunks. Lymphatic trunks merge into our two collecting ducts, the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. And then that fluid is going to return to blood supply in the subclavian veins. All right, so what is lymph and what's in it? So it's that excess tissue fluid. So it's going to be very similar to plasma, right? It's going to have be mostly water. It's going to have some ions, some small proteins. If it's around the small intestine, it's going to have some fat in it. Also, anything that's out here. So anything in the tissue fluid, okay, the interstitial fluid is going to end up in here. Okay, so in a sense, the tissues, we're going to clean up the cellular debris and everything that's around the tissue cells. So debris, pathogens are things that cause disease, so bacteria, virus particles, and then 2, cancer cells. Cancer is unregulated cell growth, and you've probably heard of people's cancer that has spread. When cells divide uncontrollably, they mutate and they lose their attachments to one another. And so when they lose their attachments, then they become a free cell. Like, so most of our cells are attached to their buddies, right? They're attached to other cells. So they become a free cell. And so if they're out here in the interstitium, they will also end up in the lymphatic system, and lymph then flows to the bloodstream. And so that spreading of malignant cancerous cells is called metastasis. And like I said, they're spreading because they detach and they enter the lymphatic system, and then they can enter the bloodstream and take up residence in other organs. Breast cancer, very common for breast cancer to turn into lung cancer, so secondary lung cancer. Also, we said that the lymphatic system, this is where our white blood cells live. Our immune system lives here. Our white blood cells are going to go from the bloodstream into the tissues and then through the lymphatic system. Okay, they circulate, they move. So it's just kind of another big picture, just kind of showing it on the arterial side. It shows all the arrows. So we have bulk flow out on that arterial side. We have exchange occurring in the capillaries. And then we have that pressure going in due to osmotic pressure. But we still leave about 3 liters every day sitting out there. And that's the job of the lymphatic system to pick that up. Gotta even it out. Did you get my theme? I saw somebody rocking over there. You know this song? Anybody? Okay. Edema means swelling. What edema is there's excess tissue in that interstitial fluid space. This happens, you can damage, have trauma or an injury, right? You get swelling. You also get swelling when there's an infection, and we'll hit that next week. So that's just normal edema. That's excess tissue fluid out in the interstitium, and you know that swelling goes down, right? Eventually it goes away, and that's because that fluid is going to be picked up by lymphatic system. Lymphedema is a special type of swelling. It is persistent swelling due to obstruction of lymph movement. And when we learned about taking blood pressure, I said you really have to watch out for your breast cancer patients, and you don't want to take blood pressure on that arm. You don't want to squeeze excess fluid out from their capillaries. So what happens if someone has breast cancer, they will remove the tumor, but they also want to remove what are called sentinel nodes. We said cancer cells detach and then they travel through the lymphatic system. And so they will take several lymph nodes in the axillary region, and then they'll send them off to pathology and look for cancer cells. And that's sort of how you also get like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. 2 and 3 have to do with how many lymph nodes have cancer cells in them. Okay. Stage 4 is when it's also metastasized and there's cancer elsewhere in the body. But that's where they get the grades from. Stage 1 means if it's just in the breast, didn't go any further. So often women that have had some of those nodes removed, they end up with just chronic swelling on that side because the road is broken, right? Because they were removed, they were taken out. And so fluid stays in the interstitium. It can't get back. Those lymphatic vessels, there's no pressure, so they're going to use the same 4 things that veins use. They have more valves than veins. The more we move, the better it is for returning fluid back to the bloodstream. I worked on a project of exercise and the immune system. Light exercise, if you think you're coming down with something, light exercise like a walk, like don't run a marathon or anything, is good to activate your immune system because you're moving the lymph through the lymphatic system. Respiratory pump, same thing, changes the pressure in abdominal thoracic cavity, and then the lymphatic vessels can also constrict. Okay, so they can constrict and move lymph from valve to valve. Okay, that's a good time to take a break. So on this side, we've discussed all the lymphatic vessels, and we'll take a break, and then we're going to color our way through lymphatic tissues and organs.